My son-in-law shoved my daughter into the kitchen island on Thanksgiving morning, and his own sister just laughed into her mimosa and said, "Maybe now she'll learn to keep her mouth shut at family dinners." I did not raise my voice. I did not cross the room and put him through the drywall, even though 63 years of restraint were screaming at me to do exactly that. I set down my coffee, walked to the hallway, and dialed a number I had not used since the day I sold my company. They had no idea what they had just started. 19 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway, and by the time the sun went down, everything Marcus Webb had built with my money was already dead. It just didn't know it yet. But to understand why it wasn't the police standing on that porch, you have to go back with me 5 months. To the afternoon I first understood that I hadn't given my daughter a husband. I had given a predator a bank account. If you're listening to this while you're driving home, or lying awake next to someone who scares you a little, take a breath. Sometimes the people who smile the widest at your table are the ones quietly picking it apart, leg by leg, waiting for it to collapse under someone you love. My name is Walter Hale. Most people who've known me more than a week just call me Walt. I'm 64 years old, and for 38 of those years I ran a fleet maintenance and freight company out of Toledo, Ohio, that I built from 2 trucks and a rented garage into something that eventually needed its own zip code. I've sat across the table from union negotiators who wanted to bury me, bankers who wanted to own me, and competitors who wanted to burn my lots down out of spite. You don't survive 4 decades in that business without learning how to read a man in about 90 seconds. I can tell you if a handshake is a lie before the second pump. I can tell you if a smile is doing work it shouldn't have to do. But when it came to my daughter, I turned all of that off. I wanted to. That's the part nobody tells you about loving your kid too much. You make yourself stupid on purpose, because the alternative is living in a state of suspicion toward the person she chose to marry. And no father wants to be that man. So when Emily brought Marcus Webb home 4 years ago, charming, sharp-dressed, running some kind of private wealth advisory firm out of a glass office downtown, I did what a lot of fathers with means do. I told myself I was helping. I co-signed the loan on their house in Sylvania. I put a substantial sum money I'd earned the hard way, with grease under my fingernails for a decade, before I ever wore a suit into what Marcus called his growth fund, an investment vehicle he swore would triple in 5 years. I thought I was building a foundation under my daughter's future. I didn't know I was pouring concrete around her ankles. It started, really started, on a Sunday in June. We were at Marcus's lake house, the one he liked to remind people cost more than most Toledo homes combined, hosting what he called a summer kickoff for his investor circle. It was 91 degrees with that thick Midwestern humidity that sits on your chest like a wet towel. Marcus had caterers, a bartender doing some kind of smoking cocktail trick with a torch, and 30 or so guests in linen and sunglasses, laughing a little too loud at things that weren't that funny. It looked exactly like the kind of life a magazine sells you. I was near the dock, holding a glass of unsweetened tea I didn't really want, watching the crowd the way I used to watch a warehouse floor, not looking at anyone in particular, just noticing everything. And that's when I saw Emily. She was standing off to the side near the outdoor bar, away from the main cluster of guests, and despite the heat, she had on a long cardigan buttoned to the collar. Everyone else was in sundresses and swim cover-ups, glistening and fanning themselves with paper napkins. My daughter looked like she was dressed for a different season entirely. It struck me as wrong the way a number on a spreadsheet strikes you as wrong before you can even say why. I walked over, gave her a hug, and felt her flinch, not big, not dramatic, just a small contraction, like a muscle bracing for impact before impact ever came. "You're going to cook in that thing," I said, keeping my voice light. "I run cold," she said, and smiled. And it was a good smile, practiced, the kind you put on for cameras. But her eyes didn't move the way they used to when she was lying to get out of piano practice as a kid. This was a newer kind of lying, a tired kind. I let it go that day. That's the first thing I want you to understand about me. I am not a man who acts on a feeling. I act on facts. So instead of confronting anybody, I did what I've always done when something in a deal smelled wrong. I started watching. Over the following weeks, I noticed things a father isn't supposed to notice, because noticing them means admitting what they add up to. Emily canceled our Sunday calls twice, citing headaches. She stopped posting anything online, where she used to share photos of her garden, her dog, silly little videos of nothing. She started flinching at loud sounds, a dropped pan at a restaurant, a car backfiring on Monroe Street, flinching in a way that had nothing to do with startle reflex, and everything to do with conditioning. And Marcus. Marcus started talking to her in front of me in a tone I recognized instantly, because I'd used it myself, decades ago, on foremen I wanted to control without anyone in the room realizing I was doing it. Soft. Reasonable sounding. Utterly suffocating. Sweetheart, why don't you let me finish that thought? You're tired. You're not making sense. Sit down. Small corrections, delivered gently, in public, so that any objection she made would look like she was the unreasonable one. I've built and broken enough business relationships to know that control rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as concern. By August, I'd hired a private investigator, a quiet, methodical man named Ray Delgado who used to do fraud work for an insurance company before going independent. I told him I wanted two things. I wanted to know if my daughter was safe, and I wanted to know exactly where every dollar of my $2.3 million had actually gone, because the quarterly statements Marcus had been sending me had started reading less like an investment report and more like a short story. What Ray found does not call make 6 weeks turned my stomach in two completely different directions at once. The financial picture first, because that was the part I could look at without wanting to put my fist through a wall. Marcus Webb's growth fund wasn't really investing in much of anything. It was, near as Ray could reconstruct from bank records and shell entity filings, a fairly standard structure where new investor money paid the returns promised to older investors, while a significant chunk simply funded Marcus's lifestyle, the lake house, a leased Bentley registered to an LLC, membership at 2 country clubs, a consulting retainer paid to his sister Vanessa for work nobody could actually describe. Men who run shell games with luxury cars, I've learned, are almost always running the same shell game with people's futures. My $2.3 million wasn't growing. It was evaporating slowly behind a very good website and a very confident smile. The second thing Ray found, I don't like repeating, even now. Photographs, medical intake forms from an urgent care clinic 2 towns over, paid in cash, under a slightly misspelled version of Emily's name. A bruise pattern on her upper arm, in a shape that only comes from a hand gripping hard enough to leave 4 fingers and a thumb. A hairline crack in her wrist that had been reported to the clinic as fell off a step stool. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of Ray's office for 40 minutes after he showed me that folder. I did not cry, though I wanted to. I did not drive to Marcus's house, though every animal part of me wanted to do that more than I have ever wanted anything. I sat there and I made myself think like the man who built a company out of 2 trucks, because that man knew something the furious father in me had forgotten. You do not walk into a fight you haven't already won. You do not confront a predator until the trap is fully built and baited, because a wounded, cornered man with resources and lawyers can do a lot of damage to a woman who is still inside his house. So I waited. That was the hardest 4 months of my life. And I want to be honest with whoever's listening. The waiting is its own kind of violence you do to yourself. Every family dinner, every holiday photo where Emily wore long sleeves and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, every time Marcus put his hand on the back of her neck in that particular way that looked affectionate to everyone else in the room and looked like ownership to me, I sat there and I smiled back, and I let him believe I was exactly what he thought I was. An old man who'd made his money and was now mostly just proud and mostly just harmless. I needed him comfortable. I needed him to keep talking, keep bragging, keep making the kind of small, unguarded admissions men make when they think no one dangerous is listening. So at every family gathering I asked him about the fund. I let him explain returns to me like I was a simple old trucker who didn't understand compound interest. I nodded along while Ray, off the record, built out a file thick enough to interest people whose job titles I won't put in writing here, except to say that some of my old contacts from 38 years of dealing with interstate freight regulation, customs, and yes, occasionally federal auditors, had not forgotten who Walter Hale was, or what I'd done for them when they needed a witness willing to testify against a corrupt shipping cartel back in 2004. I called in every favor I had left. I made it clear, quietly, to exactly the right people, that if Marcus Webb's fund was what I believed it to be, and by then, the evidence said it was, 6 ways from Sunday I wanted the file ready to move the moment I gave the word. I told nobody in my family any of this, not my wife Diane, who I love more than my own life and who would have marched over there with a rolling pin the second she knew, not Emily, because I was terrified that if she knew I knew, she would try to protect Marcus, the way abused people so often do, out of fear or shame, or a kind of conditioning that isn't her fault and never will be. I needed her safe first. Understanding could come after. I want to pause here and say something directly to you, because I know some of you listening have lived a version of this yourselves, or you're living it right now. If you are wearing long sleeves in summer for someone, if you are apologizing for bruises you didn't cause, if you are flinching at kindness because you've learned kindness sometimes comes with a bill attached, you are not the problem. You did not do this, and there is no shame in needing someone, anyone, a father, a friend, a stranger on a hotline, to help you build the door out, even if it takes them longer than you wish it would. By late October, Ray's file was complete. 22 victims across 4 states had put money into Marcus's fund, most of them retirees, several of them elderly women living alone who trusted him because he was such a nice young man. The total exposure was north of $11 million, and underneath all of it, buried in a separate folder Ray handed me without a word, was the pattern of Emily's injuries laid out clinic visit by clinic visit over 3 years, each one a little worse than the last, each one covered by a story just plausible enough that nobody but a man paying very close attention would ever have connected the dots. I had my case. What I didn't have yet was the trigger. I told Ray I wasn't moving until Marcus gave me one more reason, one clean and undeniable moment where the mask fully came off in front of witnesses who couldn't later be talked out of what they'd seen. I hated myself a little for waiting on that, but I needed it airtight, both for Emily's safety and so that when it came down so hard and so publicly that Marcus would never have room to spin it, never have a lawyer clever enough to make my daughter look complicit in her own escape. Thanksgiving gave me exactly what I was waiting for, and I am ashamed to say that some small, cold part of me was almost relieved when it happened, because it meant the waiting was finally over. We were all at my house that year. 22 of us crowded into the kitchen and dining room the way our family always has been. Too loud, too many dishes going at once, my wife directing traffic between the oven and 3 different casseroles like a woman half her age. Marcus's sister Vanessa had come along, as she often did, drinking mimosas since 10 in the morning and saying things she seemed to think were funny. Emily was setting the table. She dropped a stack of plates not badly, just an ordinary clumsy fumble, the kind that happens in every kitchen in America on a holiday, and 2 of them cracked on the tile. Marcus's face changed so fast I nearly missed it, and I have spent 40 years reading faces for a living. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, grabbed her by the upper arm, hard enough that I saw her wince, and shoved her back into the island so sharply that a bowl of cranberry sauce went over the edge and shattered on the floor beside the broken plates. "You clumsy, useless," he started, and then seemed to remember, a half-second too late, that there were witnesses. Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed, mimosa in hand, and said the thing I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. Maybe now she'll learn to keep her mouth shut at family dinners. The room went dead silent except for the football game still playing in the other room. My wife's hand flew to her mouth. My son Danny took a step forward with his fists already curling, and I put a hand flat against his chest, not hard, just enough, and said one word. Wait. I did not scream at Marcus. I did not need to anymore. I had spent 5 months building exactly this moment's aftermath, and screaming would have wasted it. I walked to Emily first, checked that she wasn't hurt worse than the wince suggested, and told her, quietly, that I loved her, and that everything was about to change, and that none of it was her fault and none of it ever had been. Then I walked into the hallway, took out my phone, and called a number I hadn't used in almost 2 decades, a former federal financial crimes investigator named Priya Anand, who I'd once helped put away a corrupt customs official, and who owed me exactly one favor of unlimited size. "It's Walt Hale," I said. "The web file is live. Move on it now, tonight, and bring backup. Because there's a woman in this house who needs to see her husband in handcuffs before she'll ever believe she's safe." 19 minutes later, I know because I watched the clock the entire time, standing on my own front porch in the cold, my breath fogging in the porch light. 3 unmarked SUVs came up my street and stopped in front of the house. 6 agents in plain jackets came up the walk. Marcus, to his credit or his cowardice, didn't run. He just stood there in my dining room, cranberry sauce drying on his $600 shoes, watching his entire architecture of lies collapse in real time as Priya's team read him his rights in front of every single person he'd ever performed his charming son-in-law act for. Vanessa's mimosa glass shattered on my kitchen floor when they told her the consulting payments made her a co-conspirator, not a bystander. By the following morning, Marcus Webb's fund was frozen, his assets seized, his fake wealth advisory license suspended, pending a criminal fraud investigation that would eventually name 22 victims and a dollar figure that made the local news for 3 straight weeks. Emily filed for both divorce and a full protective order within the month, with Ray's documentation ready to hand to her attorney the same day. My $11 million, most of it anyway, what could be clawed back, went into a victim restitution fund that a federal judge personally thanked me for helping establish. I did not do it for the money. I want to be clear about that, in case anyone's wondering. I would have burned every dollar I ever earned to get my daughter out of that house safely, and I very nearly did. It's been 4 months now since that Thanksgiving. Emily lives 20 minutes from us again, in a small house with good light in the kitchen and locks she chose herself. She's started therapy, real therapy, the kind that doesn't rush healing just because the danger is gone. She still, some days, flinches at loud sounds. Diane and I don't say anything when it happens. We just wait, quietly, until she remembers she's safe. The same patient way I waited 5 months for the proof that would let me end this the right way instead of the way my temper wanted to end it back in June. On that dock, the first day I noticed the cardigan. Last Sunday she came for dinner and wore a short-sleeved shirt for the first time in over a year, and neither of us said a word about it, because some victories are quiet, and this was one of them. And I understood without being told that she needed it to just be normal, just be a Sunday, just be her father's kitchen, and nothing more dramatic than that. I sat on the porch that evening after everyone left, the same porch I stood on 19 minutes after that phone call, and I thought about something an old union man told me back when I was 31 years old and terrified of losing my first real contract. He said, "Walt, the loudest man in the room is rarely the most dangerous one. The dangerous ones are the ones taking notes." I've thought about that for 33 years. I think about it differently now. I am not a violent man. I have never once, in 64 years, hit another human being in anger. And I am proud of that, even now, even after everything. But I learned something about myself over those 5 months that I hadn't fully known before, that there is a version of stillness that isn't weakness at all. That a father can sit at a table, smile at the man hurting his daughter, pour him another drink, ask him polite questions about his investment returns, and be building, brick by silent brick, the exact thing that will bury him. Never mistake a quiet man for a passive one. Never assume that because someone isn't shouting, they aren't watching, remembering, and waiting for the one moment they can end this cleanly, permanently, and in a way that leaves no room for the predator to talk his way back out. To every father listening, every mother, every brother or friend who has ever watched someone they love shrink a little more each year inside a relationship that looks fine from the outside, trust what you're seeing before you have proof of it. Start paying attention the moment something feels wrong, even if you can't name it yet, even if the person in front of you insists everything is fine, especially then. And to anyone listening who is the one in the long sleeves, the one flinching at the sound of a dropped pan, the one rehearsing an explanation for a bruise before anyone's even asked, I want you to hear this from a stranger who has now stood on both sides of that particular fire. You are not weak for staying as long as you did. You are not foolish for loving someone who turned out to be capable of this. And you are not alone, even on the nights it feels most like you are. There is very often someone in your life, a father, a friend, someone who loves you in a way you can't fully see from where you're standing quietly, building a way out for you, even when you can't picture what that way out could possibly look like. Sometimes it takes the shape of a phone call nobody expects. Sometimes it takes the shape of 19 minutes on a cold porch in November, waiting for headlights to turn onto your street. My name is Walter Hale, and I am my daughter's father, and I will spend whatever years I have left proving that some of us build empires not to keep them, but to know exactly how to take one apart, brick by brick, the day someone we love needs us to.